I thought I was just enduring another one of my mother-in-law's dinner parties. I had no idea that her casual insult in front of 20 guests would be the moment I finally stopped playing nice and started playing to win. The crystal wine glasses gleamed under the chandelier as I carried yet another tray of hors d'oeuvres through Diane's crowded living room. My feet ached in the heels she'd insisted I wear. "You need to look presentable, Claire. These are important people." And my face hurt from maintaining a smile while she treated me like hired staff at her precious charity gala planning dinner. 20 guests filled her formal dining room, all dressed in cocktail attire, sipping expensive wine, and discussing their latest vacations to the Hamptons and Tuscany. And there I was, my mother-in-law's daughter-in-law, wearing an apron and serving canapes like I was paid by the hour. "Claire, the shrimp puffs are getting cold," Diane called out from across the room, her voice sharp with that particular tone she reserved for criticizing me. "And please make sure to refill Mrs. Henderson's wine, properly this time. You nearly spilled last time." I hadn't nearly spilled. That was a lie. But I bit my tongue, nodded, and headed back to the kitchen, because that's what I'd been doing for 3 years, biting my tongue, nodding, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law who didn't make waves. My husband Marcus always said his mother meant well, that she was just particular about things, that I should be patient because she'd eventually warm up to me. 3 years of patience, and she still introduced me to her friends as Marcus's wife, with a tone that suggested she'd scraped me off the bottom of her Louboutin heels. But that night, something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Marcus sat at the dining table, laughing at his mother's jokes, not even glancing toward the kitchen where I'd been working for 4 hours straight. Maybe it was the fact that this was supposed to be my Saturday evening, the one night a week I had completely free from my 60-hour work weeks as a corporate attorney, and instead I was playing servant at Diane's command. Or maybe it was just time. Time for me to stop accepting the unacceptable. Time to stop making myself smaller so Diane could feel bigger. Time to stop pretending that this was normal, that this was what family looked like, that love required me to tolerate being treated like I didn't matter. I was carrying a fresh tray of stuffed mushrooms when it happened. I just entered the dining room, navigating carefully between the chairs and the guests, when Diane's friend Patricia, a woman with helmet hair and enough diamonds to fund a small country, reached for a mushroom without looking and knocked the entire tray. It tilted in my hands and 2 mushrooms tumbled onto the ivory carpet. The room went quiet. Every conversation stopped. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at the mess on Diane's precious Persian rug. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Diane said, rising from her chair with theatrical exasperation. "This is exactly why I told Marcus we should have hired professional caterers. Claire, can you please clean that up? Carefully. That rug is worth more than your car." My face burned. I set the tray down on the sideboard and bent to pick up the mushrooms, my hands steady even though something inside me was beginning to crack. "I'm so sorry, Diane," Patricia said, though she was looking at me, not Diane. "I should have been more careful." "Oh, it's not your fault, darling," Diane said, waving her hand dismissively. "The help should know to announce themselves before approaching. Claire's still learning the basics of proper service." The help. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and poisonous. Around the table, faces registered various degrees of discomfort. A few people looked away. One man cleared his throat. Marcus's face went pale, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at his wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. I straightened slowly, the mushrooms in my hand, and looked directly at Diane. She met my gaze with that expression I knew so well, the one that dared me to make a scene, that warned me not to embarrass her in front of her important friends, that reminded me I was the outsider here, the one who didn't belong in her world of old money and social connections. "The help," I repeated quietly. "Is that what I am, Diane?" Her smile was cold and sharp. "Well, dear, if you're serving food and cleaning up messes, what else would we call you? Don't take it personally. Someone has to do the work at these events." Something inside me didn't just crack. It shattered completely, and underneath it was something I'd been holding back for 3 years. Clarity. cold, crystalline clarity about exactly who Diane was, exactly what she thought of me, and exactly how much longer I was willing to tolerate it. I walked to the kitchen, disposed of the mushrooms, and washed my hands very carefully. Then I walked past the dining room, past Diane's questioning look, past Marcus's confused expression, and went upstairs to the guest room where I'd left my briefcase. Inside it was my tablet, and on my tablet was a folder I'd labeled Personal Documents. I opened it, selected 3 specific PDFs, and sent them to Diane's wireless printer in her home office. The printer hummed to life as I collected the pages, 15 sheets total, still warm from the machine. I straightened them, paper-clipped them neatly, and carried them back downstairs. The dinner party was resuming its rhythm when I walked back into the dining room. Conversations had restarted, wine was flowing, someone was laughing at a story about a yacht club mishap. Diane was holding court at the head of the table, exactly where she loved to be. I walked up beside her chair and set the stack of documents on the table next to her dinner plate. "Since we're clarifying my role in this family," I said, my voice calm and clear enough to cut through the chatter, "I thought you and your guests might be interested in seeing exactly who the help is." Diane looked at the papers, then at me, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation. "Claire, what is this? I'm in the middle of hosting." "The top document is the deed to this house," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 20 conversations died instantly. 20 people stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped pretending they weren't listening. "You'll notice it's in Marcus's name, just Marcus's name. It was purchased 8 years ago for $2.4 million, paid in full, 0 mortgage." Diane's face began to change colors, moving from confused to pale to flushed. "Claire, this is completely inappropriate. The money for this house," I continued, ignoring her, "came from the trust fund established by Marcus's grandfather, a trust fund that was set up to pay out in full on Marcus's 30th birthday. Marcus turned 38 years ago. The trust paid out $3.2 million. The house cost $2.4 million. The remaining $800,000 was invested." Marcus had gone absolutely white. He was staring at me like I'd grown a second head, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. "Now, the interesting thing about that trust fund," I said, flipping to the second document, "is that it came with very specific conditions. Marcus could access the money at 30, but there was a clause. If he was married at the time of payout, the assets became marital property, 50-50, community property under state law." I let that sink in for a moment, watching understanding dawn on various faces around the table. "The second document is our marriage certificate. Marcus and I were married 4 months before his 30th birthday. We'd been dating for 2 years. It was a small ceremony, nothing fancy, because Marcus said he wanted to focus on building our life together, not on impressing people. I thought that was romantic. I thought it meant he valued substance over show." Patricia's eyes had gone very wide. Another guest, an older man whose name I'd never learned, was leaning forward with undisguised interest. Diane looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. "The third document," I said, pulling it out and setting it on top of the others, "is a complete financial disclosure that I had prepared by a forensic accountant 3 weeks ago. After 3 years of being treated like an interloper in a family I legally belong to, after 3 years of your son allowing you to disrespect me, after 3 years of wondering why you seemed to think I wasn't good enough for your precious Marcus, I decided to do some research." "Claire, stop this immediately," Diane hissed, but her voice had lost its authority. She sounded afraid. "This document shows that when the trust paid out 8 years ago, Marcus immediately transferred $600,000 of the investment funds into an account in your name, Diane. He's been supplementing your lifestyle ever since. Your Mercedes? Marcus's money. Your yearly trips to Europe? Marcus's money. The inheritance you told everyone funded your retirement? Marcus's money. For 8 years, my husband has been secretly supporting you while you lived in a house that's legally half mine and treated me like a servant." The silence in that dining room was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Diane's face had gone from flushed to gray. Her hands were shaking. Several of her guests were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed satisfaction. Clearly, I wasn't the only person who'd been on the receiving end of Diane's condescension. "Marcus told me we couldn't afford to buy our own house," I said, and my voice finally wavered, just slightly. "We've been living in a rented apartment for 3 years, a small apartment, because he said we needed to save money. I've been driving a 10-year-old Honda because he said a new car wasn't in our budget. I've been working 60-hour weeks and taking on extra cases to build our savings account because I thought we were struggling. Because my husband told me we were struggling." I turned to look at Marcus, who was staring at the tablecloth like he wished he could disappear into it. "When did you plan to tell me?" I asked. "When did you plan to mention that we're actually millionaires, that this house is half mine, that the reason we can't afford anything is because you've been funneling money to your mother while she treats me like hired help?" "Claire, baby, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand. "No, I don't want to hear it right now. Not here, not in front of your mother's friends." I looked back at Diane, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "I just wanted everyone here to know exactly who the help is. I'm Claire Donovan Reed, senior attorney at Mitchell & Associates, where I specialize in family law and asset division. I graduated top of my class from Columbia Law. I've never lost a divorce case, not one." I pulled off the apron I'd been wearing and set it on the table next to the documents. "Dinner is over," I said. "I'll be at the Marriott downtown if my husband would like to discuss our marriage. If not, he can communicate with me through my attorney. Diane, you have 30 days to vacate this property, as it's legally half mine, and I'll be filing for division of assets. I'd suggest you start looking for an apartment you can actually afford on your retirement income, without Marcus's money." I walked out of that dining room, out of that house, and into my 10-year-old Honda with my head held high. My hands didn't start shaking until I was 3 blocks away, pulling into a gas station parking lot, letting the reality of what I'd just done wash over me. I'd burned it all down. 3 years of trying to make it work, trying to be patient, trying to win Diane's approval, trying to be the wife Marcus needed. All of it, gone in 15 minutes and 3 printed documents. And God help me, it felt amazing. My phone started ringing before I even made it to the hotel. Marcus called 6 times. I let every call go to voicemail. Then Diane called, her number flashing on my screen like a warning signal. I blocked it. Then Marcus's sister Amy called. Sweet Amy, who'd always been kind to me, but never quite kind enough to stand up to her mother. I let that one ring, too. By the time I checked into the Marriott and collapsed onto the king-size bed, I had 43 text messages, 12 missed calls, and 3 voicemails. I didn't read or listen to any of them. Instead, I opened my email and sent a message to my colleague Jennifer, who specialized in high-asset divorce cases. "I need your help," I wrote. "Client is me. It's complicated. Can we meet Monday morning?" Her response came back in less than 5 minutes. "My office, 8 a.m., bring everything." I spent that night in the hotel room, alternating between numbness and sharp, crystalline clarity about what came next. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment without realizing it. Those documents I'd printed weren't created on a whim. I'd started researching our financial situation 2 months ago, after Diane had made a comment at a family dinner about how I should be grateful that Marcus let me live in his mother's house. Something about the way she'd said it, the possessiveness in her tone, had triggered my legal instincts. Something wasn't right. So I'd started digging. Public records, property deeds, tax documents, financial disclosures that Marcus had been careless enough to leave in his email, accessible because we shared an iCloud account. The forensic accountant had been my own money, spent from my personal savings account that Marcus didn't even know existed. The account I'd opened 2 years ago, when his refusal to discuss our finances started feeling less like privacy and more like secrecy. What I'd found had been worse than I'd imagined. Not just the house and the trust fund, but a pattern of financial deception that stretched back years. Marcus had been living a double life, playing the struggling middle-class husband with me while secretly managing millions and supporting his mother's lavish lifestyle. And Diane had known. Of course she'd known. Every dollar Marcus gave her with a dollar she knew he was hiding from me. The disrespect suddenly made sense. I wasn't just the unsuitable wife who didn't come from the right background. I was the obstacle between Diane and her son's money. If Marcus and I divorced, she'd lose her cash cow. If I knew the truth about our finances, I'd demand my share. So she'd work to keep me small, to keep me grateful, to keep me feeling like I didn't belong, like I should be thankful for whatever scraps of acceptance they threw my way. Well, now I knew. And now they'd find out what happened when you underestimated someone who'd spent 7 years studying how to take apart exactly this kind of deception in a courtroom. Sunday passed in a blur of document organization and strategic planning. I made lists. I gathered every piece of evidence I had. I went through 3 years of text messages, saving every condescending comment from Diane, every time Marcus had claimed we couldn't afford something. I downloaded our bank statements, credit card records, every financial document I could access. By Sunday evening, I had a file folder 3 inches thick and a digital backup of everything. Marcus tried to come to the hotel Sunday afternoon. The front desk called my room to say my husband was in the lobby asking to see me. I told them I wasn't available and to please not allow him up. He sent flowers. I refused delivery. He sent a letter. I threw it away unopened. Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I sat in Jennifer's office and laid everything out. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. Claire, this is one of the cleanest cases of financial fraud in a marriage I've seen in 15 years of practice. He didn't just hide assets, he actively deceived you about your standard of living while funneling marital funds to a third party. That's textbook dissipation of marital assets. What does that mean for the divorce? It means you're going to get a lot more than half. The court does not look kindly on this kind of deception. We're talking potential punitive damages on top of standard asset division. Plus, that house? You have every right to force a sale or buyout. If Diane is living there, she's essentially squatting on property you half own. How long will this take? Jennifer leaned forward. That depends on whether Marcus wants to fight or settle. If he's smart, he'll settle. Because if this goes to trial, his financial misconduct becomes public record. His mother's involvement becomes public record. Given that you work in family law and he works in finance, that kind of publicity won't do either of your careers any favors. But you have less to lose than he does. I want the house, I said. I don't want to live in it. I want to sell it and take my half. I want Diane out. Done. What else? I want full disclosure of every account, every investment, every asset. I want to know exactly how much he gave his mother, and I want repayment for half of it. That was marital money. He had no right to give it away without my knowledge or consent. Also very doable. Anything else? I thought about Diane's face when I'd laid those documents on the table. The shock, the fear, the realization that her comfortable life was about to implode. I want her to know what it feels like, I said quietly, to be treated like you don't matter, to have everything you thought was secure pulled out from under you, to realize the people you trusted were using you. Jennifer's expression softened. Revenge is human, Claire, but the best revenge is living well, taking what's legally yours, rebuilding your life, and leaving them to deal with the consequences of their own actions. That's what we're going to do. She was right, of course, but as we spent the next 2 hours strategizing, part of me couldn't help feeling a fierce satisfaction at the thought of Diane packing up her designer wardrobe and moving into a modest apartment, of her having to explain to her wealthy friends why she'd suddenly downsized, of her facing the reality that without Marcus's money, she was just another retiree living on Social Security. The divorce papers were filed that afternoon. Marcus was served at his office Wednesday morning. By Wednesday evening, my phone was exploding again. But this time, it was Marcus's attorney trying to reach me. I directed all communication through Jennifer. Thursday morning, Jennifer called with an update. Marcus wants to talk settlement. His attorney is pushing hard for mediation. They don't want this to go to court. What are they offering? Your half of the house value, which they've appraised at $1.6 million, so $800,000 to you, plus $400,000 in what they're calling goodwill payment to avoid litigation. They're also agreeing to full disclosure of all accounts. Total offer, $1.2 million, plus you walk away from any claim to his future earnings. And his mother? They want her to be able to stay in the house for 6 months while she makes arrangements. After that, Marcus buys out your share and she either finds somewhere else to live or pays him rent. I thought about it. $1.2 million was substantial. It was enough to buy my own place outright, enough to rebuild my life exactly as I wanted it. But something about the timeline bothered me. Counteroffer, I told Jennifer. $1.4 million, full asset disclosure as agreed, but Diane has 30 days to vacate, not 6 months. And I want a full accounting of every dollar Marcus gave her over the past 8 years. If it exceeds $400,000, I want 50% of the excess added to my settlement. That's aggressive. They deceived me for 3 years and treated me like garbage while living off money that was legally half mine. Aggressive is what they've earned. Jennifer laughed. I'll present it. It took 2 more days of back and forth, but Marcus's attorney finally agreed. $1.4 million, 30 days for Diane to vacate, and a full accounting that showed Marcus had actually given his mother $680,000 over 8 years. Per our agreement, 50% of the amount over $400,000, an additional $140,000, was added to my settlement. Final total, $1.54 million. The papers were signed 3 weeks later in Jennifer's conference room. Marcus looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt, the kind of exhausted that comes from not sleeping and knowing you've destroyed something you can't repair. He tried to talk to me before the signing. Claire, please, can we just talk for 5 minutes, alone? I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd loved, married, built a life with. This man who'd watched his mother treat me like I was less than human and said nothing. This man who'd lied to me every single day for 3 years about money, about our future, about what we could and couldn't afford. No, I said simply, we have nothing to talk about. Sign the papers. He did. His hand shook slightly as he signed his name, transferring away $1.54 million and any claim to our marriage. When it was done, Jennifer handed me my copy of the decree and the settlement agreement. Congratulations, Claire, she said. You're officially divorced and officially a millionaire. I walked out of that conference room, out of that building, and into the parking lot where my 10-year-old Honda sat waiting. I sat in the driver's seat, holding the papers, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for weeks. Relief, grief, anger, liberation, loss. And then I started the engine and drove to the Honda dealership. 2 hours later, I drove off the lot in a brand new Accord Touring. Top of the line, every upgrade, leather seats and a sunroof, and a sound system that made my favorite songs feel like they were being performed just for me. I'd paid in cash, $38,000 that didn't even dent my settlement. The next day, I started house hunting. Not just any house, my house. A 3-bedroom Craftsman in a neighborhood I'd always loved, with a garden and a reading nook and a kitchen designed for someone who actually cooked instead of served. I made an offer that afternoon. It was accepted the next morning. News traveled fast in Diane's social circle. Within 2 weeks, I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a decidedly middle-class neighborhood, that she'd been forced to sell her Mercedes and buy a used Toyota, that she'd stopped hosting her charity planning dinners because she no longer had the space or the budget. that several of her friends had quietly stopped returning her calls once they realized she wasn't the wealthy society matron they'd thought she was. I felt nothing when I heard these things. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not pity. Just a sort of distant observation that consequences were finally catching up with actions. Marcus, I heard, was still living in the house, but he'd put it on the market. Apparently maintaining a $2.4 million property on a single income, even a good income, was more than he wanted to handle. Plus, the memories. Every room held ghosts of what he'd destroyed. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I was unpacking boxes in my new house when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Amy, Marcus's sister, standing on my porch with a nervous expression. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said. "I got your address from the settlement documents Marcus left lying around. I know I probably shouldn't be here, but I wanted to say something." I considered closing the door, but curiosity won. "What is it, Amy?" "I'm sorry," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry for never standing up to my mother, for never defending you, for pretending I didn't see how she treated you. I told myself it wasn't my place, that you and Marcus needed to work it out yourselves, but that was cowardice. She was awful to you, and I let it happen." I studied her for a moment, this woman who'd been kind in private but silent in public, who'd smiled at me over holiday dinners while her mother made cutting remarks. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "But Amy, the person who owed me defense wasn't you. It was Marcus. He was my husband. He was supposed to be my partner, and he chose his mother over me every single time. You were his sister. That's different. I don't hold you responsible for his choices." "He's miserable, you know," she said. "Completely miserable. He knows he destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him." "Good," I said, and meant it. He should be miserable. Maybe it'll teach him something about how to treat the next person he claims to love. For what it's worth, I don't think there will be a next person. I think he knows he'll never find someone like you again. Also good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have unpacking to do. I closed the door gently, but firmly. Amy's apology was appreciated, but ultimately meaningless. The time for standing up for me had been when it mattered, when I was being treated like the help in front of dinner guests, when I was working myself to exhaustion because I believed we were struggling financially. Apologizing now, after everything had imploded, was just about easing her own conscience. I went back to unpacking, and as I placed my books on my new shelves and hung my art on my new walls and arranged my furniture in my new space, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Simple, uncomplicated peace. This was my home, bought with my money, filled with my things. No one to answer to, no one to please, no one to shrink myself for. 6 months later, I was hosting my own dinner party, a small gathering of friends from work, people who valued me, respected me, treated me like an equal. We ate takeout Thai food on my back patio, drank wine from regular glasses instead of crystal, and laughed so hard my face hurt. "You seem happy," my friend Karen said as we cleaned up afterward. "Truly happy, different from before." "I am happy," I said, and realized it was completely true. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was alone in my quiet house, I thought about that dinner party at Diane's, the moment that had changed everything. I thought about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives turn out to be the greatest gifts, because they force us to finally see what we've been refusing to acknowledge. Diane calling me the help had been cruel. It had been designed to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to remind me that I would never be good enough for her world. But what it actually did was wake me up. It made me stop accepting the unacceptable. It made me stop shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. And in doing so, it set me free. I never saw Diane again. I occasionally heard updates through the social grapevine. She'd taken a part-time job at a boutique. She'd started shopping at Target instead of Nordstrom. She'd stopped attending the charity events she used to chair because she could no longer afford the donations they required. Each update was delivered with a kind of scandalized fascination by people who'd once envied her life. I felt nothing about any of it. She'd made her choices. She'd chosen to treat me like I was less than human while living off money that was half mine. She'd chosen to support her son's deception. Now she was living with the consequences. That wasn't my problem anymore. Marcus tried to reach out a few times over the first year. Emails I deleted without reading, a birthday card I threw away unopened, a mutual friend who reported he was really struggling and wanted closure. I had nothing to give him. He'd had 3 years to be honest with me, 3 years to stand up to his mother, 3 years to treat me like a partner instead of a convenient accessory. He'd made his choices too. The funny thing about closure is that you don't get it from the people who hurt you. You get it from yourself, from deciding you're done carrying their weight, from choosing to walk away from people who treat you like you're not enough. I got my closure the day I signed those divorce papers. Everything else was just noise. 2 years after that dinner party, I was sitting in my home office reviewing a case file when I got a LinkedIn message from Patricia, the woman who'd knocked over the tray of mushrooms that night, the one who'd triggered the whole incident. "I hope it's not inappropriate to reach out," her message read. "I've thought about that evening many times. What you did was one of the bravest things I've ever witnessed. I wanted you to know that watching you stand up for yourself inspired me to make some changes in my own life. I left my husband of 26 years last year. He wasn't as overtly cruel as Diane was to you, but he'd spent decades making me feel small in subtle ways. Seeing you refuse to accept that treatment anymore made me realize I didn't have to accept it either. Thank you for that. I hope you're doing well." I stared at that message for a long time. I'd never thought about that night having ripple effects beyond my own life. I'd never considered that someone else in that room might have seen themselves in my situation, might have been inspired by my decision to stop tolerating the intolerable. I wrote back, "I'm doing very well, Patricia, better than I ever was before. I'm glad you found your courage, too. We all deserve to be treated with respect, especially by the people who claim to love us. Wishing you all the best in your new chapter." Her response came quickly. "If you're ever interested, I'd love to take you to lunch and hear about your new life. No pressure, just an offer from someone who admires your strength." I thought about it for a moment, then typed, "I'd like that. How's next Tuesday?" We met the following week at a small bistro downtown. Patricia was different from how I remembered her, softer somehow, more genuine, less performative. She asked about my life, my work, my house. She told me about her divorce, her adult children's reactions, her new apartment, and her plans to go back to school for a degree she'd abandoned 30 years ago. "The thing no one tells you," she said as we finished our wine, "is how liberating it is to stop performing, to stop pretending you're happy when you're not, to stop making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger." "I know exactly what you mean," I said, and I did. That lunch turned into occasional coffee dates, which turned into a genuine friendship. Patricia introduced me to her book club. Through book club, I met other women who'd rebuilt their lives after leaving situations that didn't serve them. We became a loose community of people who understood that walking away sometimes took more strength than staying. 3 years after that dinner party, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Senior partner at my firm, homeowner, free, surrounded by people who respected me, valued me, treated me as an equal. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, which was fine. I'd learned that being alone was infinitely better than being with someone who made you feel alone. One Saturday morning, I was at the farmer's market when I saw Marcus. He was with a woman, blonde, young, nervous-looking. She was carrying the grocery bags while he checked his phone. They stood in line at the coffee cart, and I watched him order without asking her what she wanted, then hand her his credit card and tell her to pay while he took a call. The woman paid, collected the coffees, and waited while Marcus finished his conversation. When he finally took the coffee from her, he didn't say thank you, just started walking, expecting her to follow. She did. I felt a wave of sadness for her. This woman who was probably right where I'd been, believing his charm, accepting his small disrespects, telling herself it wasn't that bad, that love required patience, that he'd change. But more than sadness, I felt profound gratitude that I wasn't her anymore, that I'd found the strength to walk away, that I'd refused to spend one more day being treated like I didn't matter. Marcus didn't see me. I made sure of it. There was nothing to say to him, nothing I needed from him. He was simply a person I used to know, living his life, making his choices, hopefully learning his lessons, but probably not. I bought fresh tomatoes and artisan bread and flowers for my kitchen table. I drove home in my nice car to my beautiful house and spent the afternoon reading on my patio, drinking good wine, feeling the sunshine on my face. And I thought about that moment at Diane's dinner party, when she'd called me the help, and I'd finally had enough. When I'd decided to stop accepting disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. When I'd laid those documents on the table and watched her perfect world start to crumble. It had been terrifying. It had been devastating. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it had been absolutely, completely worth it. Because on the other side of that fear, that grief, that destruction, I'd found something I didn't even know I'd lost. Myself. The version of me who didn't shrink, didn't apologize for existing, didn't accept being treated as less than I was worth. The help. That's what Diane had called me, trying to diminish me, trying to put me in my place. But the joke was on her, because I'd helped myself right out of that toxic family, right into a new life, right into freedom, and I'd never looked back.